Okay, so here we're talking about wire. This is not going to be a very long one. I chose to build the harness for my car using mostly mil-spec wire. And what does that mean? I think that term gets abused. People throw that around and it doesn't mean a lot. But realistically, what it means is spec M22759 wire. Okay? It's typically Teflon insulated wire. It has lots of other options like TXL and stuff like that. There's a whole myriad of different insulation options, but what's key about it is much higher temp range. The lowest range of the mil spec type wire is rated for 300 degrees Fahrenheit. It goes up to as much as 500 degrees Fahrenheit depending on what you buy. You can get various types of plating. They can be tinned, they can be silver plated. There's insulation options that have just the Teflon jacket. There are some that are fiber reinforced. You'd have to look at that specification. There's a lot of different types of wire. These are some examples of that type of wire. This isn't the right spool for this wire. It's not 20 gauge. This is actually 22 gauge. It was just wound off. Um, I this wire is very expensive. Okay, so we'll talk about that in a second. And then there's regular old PVC wire, and then there is another wire called TXL, which is also pretty good. It has a temperature range of about 250 degrees. But here's the key. This piece of wire in my hand, this black wire is TXL. This wire in my hand right here is TXL wire. Okay, this particular wire, actually I could be incorrect here. This could be just regular Teflon wire. However, the key here is if you were paying retail price for these two different types of wire by the foot, this wire costs 10 times as much money as this wire does. Okay, so just put that in your mind. I don't ever buy this stuff at retail prices, okay, unless it's for aircraft applications where I need some sort of traceability. Um, if it's going into a car, you just know you're getting the right materials, right? You can buy it surplus. All of this material you see here was bought surplus because I bought this for about half the cost of what it was worth. So instead of being 10 times more expensive, it's 5 times more expensive. And in my mind, that's an acceptable amount for me to pay. Why would you use this wire? Well, it is robust, it is smaller, it is lighter, and it has a wider temperature range. I mean, it's more chemically resistant. It was meant for aerospace, military applications, and where weight was probably a key factor. And because the wire has a higher temperature range, it can also be operated at higher continuous currents. There are charts for that, so we're not going to talk about that here. But because the wire obviously would not melt at higher operating currents, you can get away with a smaller wire. But keep in mind, we're just comparing apples to apples. These are all 20 gauge wires with the exception of this spool back here, so just ignore that. These are all 20 gauge wires in this picture. So here is a 20 gauge PVC wire. This blue wire is 20 gauge, regular old PVC insulation. This is available everywhere. And so if we were to compare it to the TXL wire, this black wire is a TXL wire. I don't know if it's obvious that they're different size. They're the same wire gauge, same amount of wire inside, but the outside diameter of these two wires is different. It's about 22% smaller. The black wire is 22% smaller than the blue wire, okay? So right out of the gate, the PVC wire is heavier, but has the same amount of material in it. Actually, it may even have less, depending on... there's different strand counts available for a lot of these wires. A lot of the higher end wires are made up of a higher number of smaller wire conductors, and their circular mills adds up to more. But that's not really why their current carrying capacity is different, because their total OD is actually about the same for the copper part. But when they crimp, you need to be mindful that their circular mills are not the same. So that's probably a topic for another day. And if we compare the black wire to this orange wire, which is milspec M22759 wire, you can see that this orange wire is also smaller, and it's smaller by about 17% smaller than this. If we compare the blue to the orange, that's obviously where you're going to see the huge difference, and the total difference is about 35% difference in size. So the amount of copper is essentially the same. This wire does not contain less current carrying capacity. It actually has more current carrying capacity than this PVC wire does. Okay, it has the same capacity as likely the same capacity as this TXL wire does. In this case, this TXL wire is not tinned, but you get my drift here. The difference between these materials is the cost of the raw material. Okay. TXL is good stuff. I wouldn't put PVC wire in anything unless I was like hard up, and that's what I had. This is smaller. It's better. It's got a 250-degree temperature range. That's pretty nice. If you're trying to make the lightest harness you can, the TXL, and Teflon type wires, the milspec wire, is the smallest. And so why does that matter? Well, let's say you're building a big harness and it's this big fat harness. Well, if you make it out of this, it's going to be 35% bigger than this. It also weighs more, not 35% more, but it weighs more. And so if you're trying to trim some weight off, if this was an aircraft application, you absolutely would choose this option no matter what. The cost is irrelevant compared to the weight cost, right? And if we're talking about our cars or our fun cars or race cars or something like that, why would you use these materials? Well, a lot of connectors are designed to use these materials. So let's say that we're talking about like a Deutsch Autosport connector or something. I don't use those because I refuse to pay for them, but there's nothing wrong with them. They're certainly a high quality option. They were designed to use this type of wire, right? I believe you could also probably get the TXL in it too, but this is what most people are using with those connectors. It is the lightest option. And so if they have concentrically twisted harnesses where they have to put filler wire into them, that's not a topic for today's discussion, whereas this harness right here is just a bunch of wire just all in parallel, right? A concentrically twisted harness would be these beautiful braided cables that are made of this. And a lot of times you have to put filler wire in there to make this work. And so if you're going to put filler wire that does nothing but allow you to braid the harness correctly, would you want to put in something that's 35% smaller and weighs less? Of course you would. So overall, you'd end up with a really flexible, really durable harness, and that is exactly why they do that in professional motorsports. What does that have to do with us, right? Kind of bottom feeders of the industry. Buy this stuff surplus, like I did, and it's not too bad. Like, let's take this roll here. This is just 25 feet of this, and it's $6.20. This is about half of what it would cost. Because it's purple, it would actually probably cost a lot more because probably nobody has that on the shelf. But if we were to look at something like this white wire, most of the milspec wire is all white. So if this wasn't striped and it was just white, it would be what's commonly available. Colors might be ludicrously expensive, but in the surplus market, they cost the same. This is all 20 gauge I've showed you, but let's take a look at something much bigger. This is 14 gauge, but below it here, there we go. This is 12 gauge. 12 gauge wire, right? 12 gauge is a reasonably good sized piece of wire, but the milspec, 22759 equivalent is not very big, right? This is we get a 20 gauge PVC wire, get our blue wire back. That's a 20 gauge PVC wire next to a 12 gauge TXL wire. So there's a huge difference in size, right? I can pack a lot more of this into a much smaller space if I need to, and it weighs less, but it still has the same amount of copper in it. So the current carrying capacity of this is not reduced, right? In fact, in the case of this particular wire, it would be higher, right? Because this has a higher insulation rating, right? So you could run it at higher temperature if you wanted to. So that's kind of the brief, what does mil-spec wire really mean? I think the term kind of gets thrown around a little too much, and that's kind of frustrating probably to a lot of people that build, high-end harnesses, for a living. But the key takeaway here is it's just the difference in the size and weight of the materials and the temperature limits as far as most of us are concerned at the bottom feeding levels of motorsports. We're not professional racers likely that's watching this video from me, and you're not building a harness for your, open wheel, Indy car looking type thing, right? So if this is just your own projects, if you're buying this stuff surplus, it's probably the best materials you can buy for your money. If you're buying it all new materials, you'd probably buy TXL. It gives you a decent amount of the benefit. It is a little smaller. It is a little lighter. It's decent quality, and it's a tenth the price if you're paying retail for that stuff. So if you want to try to minimize your weight, I don't know that you're going to notice a big difference over TXL, but TXL is very commonly available as well. So, there's that. The PVC wire is going to be the largest and the lowest temperature scale. That varies widely because a lot of it's cheap junk. And then, of course, there are good quality PVC wires exist. But it's easier to ensure you're getting a better product out of this stuff, right? Because it's all controlled. And that's it. So hopefully that helped.